Hi, this is Dave Thomas from GOTO Chicago, and I have the pleasure to be talking to Matias Niemela, who's here now from Toronto, talking about AngularJS and in particular his contribution to this great new framework, which is in the NG animation, the animation classes, and I had was fortunate enough to see his talk today, and all those horrible transitions and event catching and so on. It's really quite nice to see how elegantly you've abstracted those away and put them in there. So, how long have you been working with the AngularJS?
About with the framework or
Right.
with like professionally, like
Yeah,
full time.
yeah.
So the framework, I've been working with it for almost 2 years, but then developing it has been almost a year and a half.
And just a general question about Angular, it seems to be the framework to use, and certainly it's very nice to be able to work in a more declarative style as opposed to so much JavaScript. Any words of advice of people who have existing JavaScript code? Sort of, should
Well,
migrate. Do your new stuff with Angular. It's certainly a debate in my own organization. They've looked at it and said this looks really great, but we have all this stuff that's running.
yeah, it's the switch might be a little bit tough because it also depends on how websites are built. Nowadays, websites, there's less work on the server, more work in the browser, and Angular facilitates that. So it might not be a very trivial thing to switch over to Angular with existing code, but if you're building a new website or a big application to start off with, then that's a good idea.
Well, certainly in our case, we're doing much more apps than websites, so it looks like that's really a strong suit for a lot of client-side heavy lifting.
Right, so anything that involves a lot of updates to the UI, a lot of data flying around, form building and so on, Angular is great for that.
Now, CSS is always increasing in power, it seems, but I'm not a CSS expert, but it seems that it's sometimes not quite as easy to share style sheets and reuse some of that CSS information that you'd like. It seems like the approach in Angular, give us some leverage in terms of doing that.
So the approach of Angular with the animations is to keep the animation code, the CSS animation code in CSS, not have a heavy amount of crossover between JavaScript and CSS. And that's how it should be. You should be isolating as much as you can, keeping each technology specific to what it can do. But CSS, there's still new features coming around, and it's still improving. So it's difficult to keep those two separate. In the end, if you want to do JavaScript coding, you'll have to obviously use JavaScript.
Now, Angular being, at least publicly identified in some cases with Google because of MISCO and so on, is it should someone be concerned about using Angular in a non-Chrome browser?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, I just wanted to put that out there because I think some people sometimes assume that just because a framework comes from a given source or the key contributors are that it isn't. And that's certainly I've seen people using it across the board.
Right. No, there isn't any sort of bias against a particular browser like Chrome or anything. JavaScript in general and web technologies are very consistent among browsers. Obviously, depending on what you're trying to build, then you probably run into sort of inconsistencies. But Angular by itself is fair to all browsers.
And is that true for the animation support as well?
Yeah, the browsers that don't support animation, that being IE8 and IE9, the CSS ones, and you got to luck with those, but for all the other ones, they support it. But you can always use JavaScript animations on your own.
So the work you were showing, what release of Angular were you illustrating today?
That was 1.3, but it would work the same in 1.2.
Okay. And where do you see, what are the big things that you see coming next in terms of your work in Angular?
It's a good question. I'm kind of jumping between places with Angular, like doing some work on Angular Dart. Recently, I did some work with Form, displaying the error message mechanisms and so on. So, yeah, stuff with the forms, stuff with UI, lots of things.
Well, I want to thank you for this brief interview. It was very, very interesting, and those of you that haven't looked at Angular and how it, you can do your animation as well, so it really provides a nice abstraction for building rich client-side applications. Thanks a lot, Matias.
Thank you.